Good afternoon, everyone. As Paddy said, my name is Phil Mooney. I'm the Vice President of the SRFU and a member of the Trustee Board. And I'm delighted to be able to host the afternoon session, the final session of the AGM, which is the chance to answer the questions that you guys have submitted. And we asked you to sort of come up with any sort of burning questions you may have had around the game, particularly in sort of everything that's going on at the moment with adaptations to the game and lots of changes and lots of uncertainty. We've had a really good response from the sector, and I've got quite a few questions that have been pre-submitted. But what I'd also like to invite you to do is, those of you who haven't had a chance to submit a question to us, please feel free, if you come up with an idea, if you have an idea if you want to ask any of our panel, please pop it in the chat and I will try and address as many of your questions today as we can. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel today. First of all, we have Mark Saltmarsh from the RFU, who is the player pipeline manager for the RFU. Good afternoon, Mark.
Hi, Phil.
Thank you, Mark. And Mark will be answering questions that are specifically addressed around the game itself and the RFU management of the game. And so hopefully Mark will be able to help us on that front. Also like to welcome Ben Phillips, who's the Head of Competition and Performance for BUCS. Good afternoon, Ben.
Afternoon, Phil.
Thank you for being able to join us. And as you can imagine, Ben will be answering questions particularly that are in relation to BUCS itself, so the running of the games themselves and competitions. And then from within the organisation itself, from within the SRFU, represented by Phil de Glanville, who is our SRFU council member and a member of the Trustee Board. And Phil also sits on the RFU board and on the Professional Game Board. Good afternoon, Phil.
Good afternoon, Phil.
And Phil will be answering any questions, particularly to do with sort of leadership of the game itself, governance, and the RFU itself, and sort of the wider questions across the sector. And then last but by no means least, our final member of the panel is Mark Hyndman, and Mark Hyndman, who you've already met, is our chair of the SRFU and also sits on the Trustee Board. Good afternoon, Mark.
Afternoon, Phil, and I'm off mute this time.
Excellent. So that is our panel. Oh, and I should say Mark will be particularly addressing any questions around the SRFU ourselves, particularly around how we support our members moving forward this year. Okay, so before we get started though, we thought it'd be a really good opportunity to have an update from the sector as we're joined by some real leaders of the game from across our various sort of components. So we've asked Mark from the RFU and Ben to put together a quick update for you of what's been happening. So if I could ask Mark to start off with an update from the RFU. Thank you, Mark.
Great, no problem, Phil. Afternoon, everyone, and great to see so many people on the AGM and on the call again. What I'll do is just update really around return to play and return to rugby now and going forwards, and then a little bit around our sort of business planning, which is worth an update as well, because things have certainly moved on there as well. And if I start there, actually, as you're all aware, we've had some challenges over the last year or more around in the RFU around our revenues, but we have reached agreement internally around our business plan for 2021-22. It's still a really challenging financial situation for us as the revenue from Twickenham is still really limited, and certainly we were hoping we'd go further than what will happen from this weekend onwards at Twickenham, but still we're in a situation where we're not able to drive the revenues that we had. So it is still a challenging landscape, and 21-22 won't be drastically different financially from the year before. However, we have been able to confirm, and a number of you have been part of this, is confirm our grants to the Students' RFU for the year, so our CB funding to constituent bodies, and also with our university partners and clusters as well. So at least we've been able to give you the indications that you needed. And thank you very much for bearing with us over that time while we look to confirm those amounts as well. We still have to be cautious right across the game because we have to be prepared to modify things, which may well happen again. Fingers crossed that it won't, but we still have to make sure that we're cautious going forwards. And it is a chance just to thank my team, Andrew, Jonathan, and Richard, who have worked really hard to try and keep you as our university partners all in the loop on that, and have banged on the door many times, as you would think they would do, certainly on my do, on me, on others, to get the numbers. So thanks very much to the guys. Our work in the university sector sits under the Community Game Board, which is the lead group for the game across the community. And just to let you know that the limited budgets that we have got, which are still sizable and still major budgets compared to what other sports are able to do, and we do acknowledge that, will be focused on our strategic objectives. And just to briefly list those, and you'll see these are really part of what we would do and what works around universities as well, include keeping our clubs strong and flourishing, making sure that the game for 14 to 18-year-olds as they go through their teenage years is really attractive and inclusive, so that when they kick out into university, they're still wanting to play. Driving the women and girls game, really key objective. Making sure we're providing opportunities for players of all motivations to play the game in all sorts of formats. And then, of course, ensuring, as Mark has talked about earlier, that we're driving the diversity and inclusion of rugby as well. So you'll see those threads running through everything that we do. In terms of return to rugby and where we are, very briefly, as you'll all be aware, we need to work to the strategy of the government. So when government weren't able to move to their step 4 of the easing of lockdown, that affected our roadmap as well, and we remain at D2 at the moment. Everything is crossed, and we wait for what will happen from the 19th of July onwards, because we're still not able across the adult game to be able to get back to mauling and scrummaging. Now, of course, if that goes beyond the 19th of July, that will start to knock into and have impact on what can happen in the adult game from September onwards. So we've got everything crossed, but we can't talk really about what's going to happen next until we have confirmation from government what's going to happen. Now, we're really positive, as are lots of other sports that you'll be involved with, about things opening up after the 19th of July. And if that does happen, then we'll be back onto the roadmap, easing things back into getting back to the full game from September that we all want to get to. There are some really positive indications about players' appetite to get back into the game next season, and that includes across universities as well. But we do know there are some groups where that's going to be more challenging than others, and certainly students moving across the country to start playing rugby in a different environment could well be one of those groups, as well as we know that the players who haven't been able to play the type of game that they would want to play, front 5 forwards are an example, have also been affected. It'll be more challenging for them to get back into the game. So while there's an appetite to get back, we can't underestimate it's going to be a tough challenge for lots of people in different ways, and that's what we're focused on, as I said, is trying to get everyone back into the game. And just finally from me, a really important point is you'll also, or we wouldn't want you to expect to see us doing anything from an RFU point of view in universities without the SRFU and BUCS and yourselves as institutions as well. It is a partnership, and certainly from my point of view, we need that partnership to be working together to do this as much as possible. So we'll be right there alongside the other groups on this call, Phil, and continue to see that partnership working. We're planning already together on how we can try and take advantage of getting back to rugby from September onwards.
Thank you, Mark. Ben, I wonder if I'd like to invite you to say a few words on behalf of BUCS.
Absolutely. Thank you, Phil. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. Great to join SRFU AGM. I remember being on a similar call a long time ago when I was president at King's London. So it's nice to be back amongst a friendly group. So I want to give a bit of update on BUCS itself and where we're at, and then also talk a little bit rugby specific as well. Clearly, it's been a massively challenging year for BUCS, with very little activity happening in the first 2 semesters, and things only starting to open up really into term 3. But equally, term 3 has been great. We've had a full cricket program. Sport is coming back. A lot of our events team. I know a lot of people will also do individual events as well as play rugby. So hopefully you've had a chance to compete in some of the events that we've run over the summer events. And it's been really positive to see students back and competing. That's why we exist, I suppose. And so to see that has really been a fill up as we go into the summer. And we're positively working towards the 21-22 season now. Moving on to what I suppose how that happens, and the process for those that aren't maybe as aware of how you get to play fixtures on a Wednesday afternoon, if you like. Your institutions submit to us the team entries they want. We build that into a provisional league and calendar world. We then go out to your institutions to check that all makes sense and we haven't made any errors on what happened in previous years. That then gets published ahead of the fixtures all going on BUCS Play, which you can then see and plan for, and fingers crossed, all being well, start to play your fixtures. And where we are in that process, so team entries closed on the 11th of June, so a few weeks ago now, and really positive. Rugby Union was actually saw an increase in teams from the 1920 figures. One of the few sports that did see an increase, so that's really great. We're up to 417 teams across our whole programme. That obviously includes all of the home nations, but really positive to see growth there. Last Friday, those provisional leagues came out to institutions, so your administrators, those are on the call, and administrators not on the call, will all be aware that leagues are all out now, and we're asking for feedback to check that. Again, on that, this is a different year, so those leagues are based on how 1920 finished. There is documentation on our website which will explain that in quite detail. If you're not sure, please do check in with your administrator, because they'll hopefully remember how that came to pass. But we deemed it the fairest way to work out the leagues for this season. So those leagues are now out and have been published. And alongside that, the hoped for dates for this year, so they're out as well. Again, with a request for feedback, the opportunity to work with you. We want as much sport to take place as possible, so we do ask administrators to feedback on that. And equally, it's a tight year. Everyone knows that come March time, then if there's been bad weather, we're up against it to get all your fixtures completed. So we've got to try and balance all those things in to make that happen. So that provisional league window will close on the 16th of July. So if you are interested in checking what's been happening, please do check in with your administrators and get them to feedback if there's anything we need to hear. We've then got 2 weeks to try and make all the changes that are appropriate, or feedback to you where things need to stay as they were. And therefore the final leagues and that final calendar for the year will come out on the 28th of July. And that's ahead of, and I'm hoping we haven't jinxed this, that's ahead of all the fixtures being released and live on BUCS Play on Friday the 13th of August. That's the date we're working to. It's generally in line with, it's a bit later than what we would normally hope for, but in line with the timeframes for everything else that we've done this year. So if all things are equal, Mark there highlighted the English government date of the 17th of July. If things progress well there, then we would expect no change to that. And so hopefully on the 13th of August, you'll see those fixtures. Start dates for that provisional calendar, they vary across the tiers as they always do. But we're currently planning for a start as close to normal as possible. So that's in that 6th to 20th of October window, which you'd normally expect to see fixtures start on. A bit later for some of the lower tiers, particularly on the women's side that have those skills weeks at the start, and looking to have a league deadline in the middle of March as we would normally. So no change there. Christmas break as there would be, and try and get all the fixtures in. We're looking to run a league and knockout competition as we would normally, and in terms of the laws of the game, again, Mark made reference to there. We'll be doing what the home nation NGBs tell us. That they're the experts, and that's why we're really grateful to be working in partnership with them to make that happen. Travel guidelines equally, we'll be taking government and NGB advice on that, and your own institutional advice. Without those three agreements, then you need to make sure you're not travelling in conflict or any of those. And I suppose the final thing is that we are going to be working in a bit where we need to rely on the spirit of rugby and the spirit of sport. We are still in a pandemic. Flexibility is going to be required, and change may have to happen at short notice. But if everyone takes the attitude that certainly the SRFU and the RFU take of just getting people back playing rugby and enjoying it and prioritising that, then I think we'll do well. So much like others, staying positive, planning for a full season, but ready to flex and work with everyone to get as much done as possible. And that's probably where we're at, Phil.
Thank you, Ben. That's really great. Really, really good to hear from both yourself and Mark on sort of general update from where we're at with both the RFU and BUCS standpoints. If I sort of turn my attention now to some of the questions we've had from the sector, I'm not going to do these in any particular order. Last time we did this in sort of, I tried to group the questions together, but we've got a nice spread this year. So first up in the order I've got the questions here. I think this is probably a question best for Phil de Glanville, and it's the perennially popular subject of ticket allocations. So we have a question in from Oxford Brookes University, if we have an update on ticket allocation for RFU member clubs. I wonder if you could help us with that one, Phil.
Yeah, it's always a hot topic. Good afternoon, everyone. I think what Ben said was kind of fundamental to that is about being flexible with it, because we don't know necessarily how many people we're going to get into Twickenham until the last minute. Just so you know, we've kind of planned for 50% next year in terms of ticket allocations. And as you know, the main driver of all the investment that goes into the game is those matches at Twickenham, goes into the professional and community game. So they're pretty important and fundamental. So, I mean, the approach we've taken with restricted ticket allocations, potentially this year was to meet our contractual obligations first. So, those sponsors and those debenture holders, for whom we've got written into their contracts. Because clearly those sponsors have supported us very well through this pandemic, even though the games haven't been played. So that will still be the approach, and then it will be on a pro rata basis, depending on how many we're allowed in the stadium thereafter. So it will still be distributed, as it has been done to clubs in the game. But it will be done on a pro rata basis once we know what our maximum capacity is during the course of the season. If we do get a very, very short notice, so for instance, if within a kind of 2 or 3 week period, we were allowed to bring more than we planned, we may not have time to go through that process, and we may then also have to kind of supplement that with a kind of open market online booking, first come, first served approach. So again, flexibility is key, I think, going into this year.
Thank you, Phil. Absolutely, and I think it in terms of the flexibility, I think that nicely sort of leads us on to our next question. We had a question in from the University of Essex in regards to fundraising, actually, and as we know, sort of fundraising within our member clubs is hugely important. A lot of clubs are kept going by their ability to do their own fundraising and to supplement their sort of pot of money. And so we've had a question in which is really what the panel thinks the impact on the ability of our clubs to fundraise, how that will be restricted in this coming season. We don't know exactly what the season is going to look like yet. And whether there's any suggestions on what they can do. And I wonder, Mark, whether you could use this opportunity to also sort of highlight the grants, the SRFU grants funding as well. So that's to, I suppose, if we start with Mark on that one, and sorry, Mark Hyndman, and then we'll sort of work our way around the panel.
Cheers, Phil. Yeah, hugely difficult because we know all businesses are in the same challenging place that sport is, so maybe not as willing. I guess it's clubs to think about what they can offer in return for that sponsorship, etc. But in terms of the SRFU, yes, we do have a grants section, and this is the bit I've been waiting to do for years, Phil. Is if colleagues want to go to our website, which I've just put in the chat. Yes, I've been waiting to do that. There's a grant section, and people will be able to see what grants are available. We obviously supported 32 rugby clubs this year, issuing around about £11,000, and that was mainly targeted around the recovery. We do change the themes year on year, and we go out for member feedback on that. So watch this space on the grant section, and there may be maybe funds available for that clubs can apply for.
Thank you, Mark. I wonder whether Mark Saltmarsh might have some anything to add in terms of keeping an eye on anything that might be coming out from the RFU themselves in terms of guidelines around sort of activity that's permitted and as and when that activity is going to be opened up.
Yeah, just it's exactly that, really, Phil. We're continually keeping an eye on things, and you'll all be aware that we were able to get some funding from government around the recovery, winter sports fund, etc. So still looking out for those opportunities and trying to get them down into the club games as quickly and as fully as possible. So that is continuing. There's been a really good take up of the loan scheme, which fits more to community clubs than university clubs. But those sorts of opportunities are absolutely on our agenda, Phil, to try and make sure that we're taking advantage of those and getting them down into the community game.
Fantastic, thank you. So sort of moving on around what the season's going to look like. I wonder, perhaps, Ben, if you could, I know you obviously did a bit of a nice sort of précis of what the BUCS has been up to, but we have a specific question around are there any plans to restructure the university leagues, and if so, what is that likely to look like? That was from the head of rugby at Manchester Met.
Yep, absolutely. So I think I'd probably just refer back in terms of how we generated the leagues for this coming year. It is based on 1920 finishing positions, and there's some nuance in there around if your league was completed or not, and the leagues either side of you were completed or not. So if you do want to find out the real nuance of that, the information is available on our website, or you could ask your institutional administrator for the details. But we don't have current plans to restructure the university leagues for the coming year. And as I said, those provisional leagues are now with institutional administrators. There are some changes due to a couple of reasons. So one, our collision sport regulations that allow new and existing teams to request entry in a higher league for safety reasons. So where that's happened, institutions have been contacted already to ask whether how they as a league wish that to be administered. And there's also some regulatory changes at men's tier 5 and below and women's tier 2 and below, which again, feedback has been requested at those levels. The aim of those changes was really feedback that we had from our sport advisory group to get more matches played at those levels. And they're very similar to the RFU's game on principles that work really well at just allowing rugby union to take place. So if people have got specific questions around those regulations, happy to deal with them outside of this meeting because they get quite nuanced. But yeah, those are the only changes expected.
Wonderful, thank you, Ben. And while I've got you on this, we've had a couple of questions specifically around BUCS Super Rugby and whether there's any changes sort of for that separate to changes generally across the league.
Yep, absolutely. Current plan is to go ahead for the full season of BUCS Super Rugby. That would commence on the 29th of September. Would be round one. We're very aware that it's a long BUCS Super Rugby season with the 10 teams playing each other twice. So remaining open to that. We're currently in conversation with the teams around fixture dates, what those fixtures actually look like, in terms of, can we play more localized early to give more chance of that happening? But in general, planning for a full league season with the knockout competition as would be afterwards. So currently optimistic that we'll play the full season.
Excellent, thank you, Ben. Next up, we have a question in from the Sport Development Officer at De Montfort, and this is sort of one for each of the panel to sort of answer in turn. And the question is, what is the one adaptation within rugby that has had to happen over the last 12 months, sort of specifically due to the pandemic, that you would actually be hoping to continue to implement once we're back to full delivery? So a really interesting question, this, around whether you've actually seen an adaptation that's introduced because we had to, that actually you think is an opportunity, as it were, and you'd like to keep in the game moving forward. So I'm going to pick on Mark Saltmarsh first.
Thanks, Phil. I think for me the key thing that has been a necessity is playing is how teams have played each other, and there's been a lot more internal rugby, and this is right across the game. Now, intramural is clearly a big part of the university rugby setup already, but it's not been so much the setup in clubs, schools and colleges, but it is now. And I think that actually has led to, we've had reports all over the place of more players playing who hadn't played before, because the game was more local, more accessible, a bit friendlier, less serious. Training wasn't an ingredient of doing it, because the internal type activity is far more about activity and participation. Now, that's something that we've been building already through the cluster programme, through the work that we've done to support intramural, but actually accelerating that further so that more people get a chance to go and play is really important. And I think that's especially important for your freshers, isn't it? As Bob said at the beginning, they've missed out on a whole experience now. We've probably got 2 years of freshers, haven't we? First and second years. So getting them playing internally more regularly, I think, is one of the things that I'd really like to see more of.
No, that's great. Thank you, Mark. And it really reminds me, actually, one of the sort of the best things about the work I do for the SRFU is I'm involved in sort of reading and selecting the nominations that go through for the awards. And I must say that this year, one of the real highlights for me was the explosion of intramural activity. And that activity at that level of the game. And as you say, there was a real sense of opportunity in the face of crisis, and opportunity was seized really to do as much activity as possible where it could do, perhaps at a less structured level. But activity is activity at the end of the day, and it was fantastic because it was people playing the game. Phil, would you like to have an attempt at this next? What have you seen introduced that you actually would like to see retained?
It's been fascinating watching the amended game, you know, in the women's in the AP 15s, and I've certainly seen it kind of locally, you know, when schools and colleges started getting back to playing it, you know, after April. I, as a back, obviously, you know, I'm delighted there've been no scrums and no mauls, but I suspect that a lot of the forwards out there will take issue with me on that one. But it's certainly been a lot quicker game as a result, so I've really enjoyed that. But no, you know, scrums and mauls are a fundamental part of the game. You know, they're here to stay. So it'd be good to get that back. What certainly longer term, in terms of the actual nature of the game, you know, we are still looking at significant trials coming through to make the game safer. And so some people might be aware now we've extended the waist high tackle laws at under 15s through to under 18s now. So there's going to be trials throughout this season and looking at that. So I think everything we can do to make the game as safe as it possibly can is great. and on the international stage, pushing World Rugby again, things like not having replacements, so going back to people only coming on, when there are injuries, so that you need a potentially less on your bench, so you can get more games played, and B, those athletes are endurance athletes, not strength. So part of the challenge.
Excellent, thank you, Phil. And as a proud forward, yeah, can't wait to see the scrummaging back. We wouldn't look so pretty in the forwards if you got rid of the scrummaging. Ben.
Yeah, I mean, as a Scot that's been at the hands of too many maul tries by England over the years, I'm all for the elimination of mauls. It's nothing worse than just sitting there and watching that white pack just drive over again and again and again against us. But I do appreciate its value in the game. I think probably for me it's the off-field opportunities and the creativity that people have had to come up with to get value out of their being part of the club. It's sort of linked to what Mark was saying, I think. And I will just take the advantage chance just to acknowledge and congratulate University of East Anglia's Women's Rugby and University of Nottingham Women's Rugby Club, who have both made the shortlist for our Inspirational Committee Award. And those are the things, I think, where you've had to think outside the box, because we talk a lot of BUCS around how important sport is for developing skills off the pitch. And this year it's never been more true than ever. So I really hope that the different levels of creativity that we've seen this year continue on. It really starts a new chance to do more and do more differently.
Brilliant, thank you. And last but by no means least, Mark.
Yeah,
Hyndman, that is.
I'll be really quick, Phil. Just building what Ben just said. Rugby is really a 360 experience. There's the playing bit, but then there's all the stuff that happens off the field, and we've probably had as a game an opportunity to step back and do a bit more in that. And some of the nominations that came through awards around inclusion and activity off the pitch was just phenomenal. I guess from an SRFU perspective, we're on our second digital AGM. We've had more engagement with our members over digital platforms than we've ever had before, and I think there's something about that will be positive to continue and keep that two-way conversation going with member clubs.
Brilliant. No, thank you. Okay, so just looking at some of the other questions that we've had submitted, and I'd like to obviously take this opportunity as well. We haven't had any questions added live while we've sort of been on air. So please, if you are sort of enjoying the AGM this afternoon and you do have a question, please do pop it in the chat and we will try and get it answered for you. It's a rare opportunity to hear from some real sort of top leaders of the game and engage with it sort of live. So we've had one question in, which is from the president of St Mary's University, and that's how best to prepare first years who may never have experienced senior rugby, and certainly will be going into a situation where actually there's been very little activity for 18 months, and so therefore even potentially we have second years, so our first years and second years who may never have played university rugby. We're in a really interesting scenario this September. So I wonder, Mark Saltmarsh, what can we do in the sector to support these clubs and essentially to help people effectively get from a standing start?
Yeah, Phil, it's when I talked earlier about one of the key groups, this is right at the top of the list. Players, male and female players who have gone through that age grade programme and have missed the top bit, which is key to the transition of them out into adult rugby, basically from beyond 18. So what we have done is we've done some work through the spring to actually try and create resource examples, best practice that works in the game already and right across the board, whether it be in the adult club game, community club game, or university club game as well. And it's basically in the form of hints and tips of how do we try and engage 18 and 19-year-olds and take them on that journey. Now, the key thing on this is mindset. If we are focused on the top 20% who will probably find rugby anyway, or rugby will find them, then we're getting it wrong. It's those who are at risk in the sort of middle group, isn't it? The 60% who could decide to take or leave sport and rugby. They're the ones we really need to target. So those resources we've put together are focused on them. And what we'll be doing is releasing all of that as part of our sort of summer activity framework information. So that's been worked on by, some of you'll know Dave Livesey in our team, who's our player retention manager, and he's had a team of people, including some of our universities team, and we've run it by a number of people to try and look at, are these the sorts of things that will help those players, because it is a massive challenge. We don't profess to have all the answers, and actually a lot of the answers will be within our university clubs. There'll be some great stuff that has been done in the past with freshers that is absolutely bang on for this situation we're going into. So again, anything that can be shared through these networks is going to be really important. And what we'll do is we'll provide the links back to everyone and through Elisa and the system to get that information out.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. And we touched on this earlier, actually, in one of the slideshows, but I wonder whether it's an opportunity now. I wonder if I could ask you just to explain the sort of the scenario or the situation around Regulation 19 and the impact on university clubs. We've had a question on whether that can be explained a little bit more. Is
that Regulation 9, Phil?
Sorry, I said 19, didn't I? Apologies.
Yeah.
I meant Regulation 9. Apologies. I don't know where 19 came from. I don't even know what Regulation 19 is.
9.
But yes, if you could give us a little update on that, that'd be great. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. So as Phil said earlier, the priority around player safety has never been higher, and certainly the challenges. The public challenges in the media, etc., something that we have to be really mindful of. So what we've been looking at over the last 2-3 years, this was certainly before lockdown, was how do we improve the care that's available to players on pitch side? And it is really challenging because, of course, what we do know, particularly as most of the game is volunteer led, creating expertise on the touchline costs money and time. So what we've done is work through again through our Rugby Safe program of how should we as a game be behaving around that support that we have on touchlines, and so Regulation 9 has been updated to ensure that everyone must do a risk assessment of the activity that's happening on the pitch, and then align pitch side care, first aid to that risk assessment. Now, actually, for the majority of clubs, and particularly in a university setting, that's not something that won't have been done in the past. And I think there are a lot of multi-sports activities happen on a Wednesday afternoon, etc., aren't they, where the assessment of that activity in its entirety, what is the appropriate level of care that's required, has been done. So for many, it won't be a change, but the application of it is the key. And when you do have volunteer committee structures in universities, they need to be linked into that with the professional staff that will be doing that as well. So we've changed that regulation because we found that a lot of it wasn't being applied, and that's the key why. So it will cause challenges, but it's certainly, when we talk about player safety and support and welfare, it's absolutely the way that we and all sport really needs to go. I don't know if Phil, if you want to add anything to that. It's gone through the governance and council system, who have really robust debate on these things, don't they? So, and certainly the side coming down on the side of player safety and welfare is where it's come from.
Thank you. No, thank you, Mark. And I guess the further information around that will be available on the website.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, the Rugby Safe page. I'll put the link in. Actually, I'll put the link in on the Rugby Safe page on the
Brilliant.
chat.
Thank you very much. Just sort of got one eye on the time now, so we're actually sort of running out of time a little bit. But there's a couple of quick fire questions here. I wonder whether just a question around how BUCS and the RFU are going to manage cross-border competition. I wonder if, Ben, you could start us off on that, and then if there's anything that you need to add, Mark, you can.
Yep, absolutely. So at the moment, there's no expectation from government anyway there will be any restrictions on cross-border travel for competition. We'll obviously continue to monitor this, and where possible, as I mentioned before, we'll look to schedule local fixtures or intra-nation fixtures early in the season to push back the date that we might need to cross borders. The big thing, I think, is more actually around law regulations and the modified laws, and each home nation's obviously able to, for good reason, to create their own modifications, and we're committed to pulling together the home nations and working out the best way to come up with as close to a consistent set of laws as we can. We're aware that the big challenge is for referees, and we don't want to put an unnecessary strain on officials who are already having to come back, and they're in exactly the same position as the players. They haven't done anything for 2 years either, so they're trying to come back to grips with what life is like. So we don't want to stretch them too much, but we're hopeful that next month we can get all the home nations together to have a start of conversation about this, and come to a sensible conclusion. So travel at the moment, we're positive that it'll be allowed, and the laws something that we need to pick up with the home nations, and we'll do this coming month.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I'm very sad, but I'm being informed that we're out of time. That went very quickly. So I'd just like to thank the members of our panel for joining us. Mark, both Marks, Mark Hyndman, Mark Saltmarsh, Phil de Glanville, and Ben, of course, from BUCS. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and thank you for taking the time to give some really good, clear answers to the sort of the most pertinent questions that we've been asked for this session. So as you'll see, some of the links as well have been popped on the chat. So if anything has come up this afternoon that you wanted to follow up, do please have a look on the chat, and you'll see there's some links there for you to follow. And as always, be sure to follow the social media channels of the RFU and the Students' RFU, because we regularly post up there any updates and news for the game coming up. So really, it's just left to me to say thank you to everyone for joining us this afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed the AGM and the question and answer session that we've been able to host for you this afternoon. Stay safe over the remaining of the summer, and let's all look forward to what we all hope is a return to some normality and getting back to the game that we all love. Thank you very much.